The vault settled into its evening hush, the way a quilt settles across a tired body, each corridor smoothing into quiet, each vent offering its soft, steady breath. In Archive Room C, Senior Archivist Elena Vasquez pulled the chain of her desk lamp and watched the circle of amber light take shape on the work surface, gathering the edges of paper into focus while leaving the far shelves in contemplative dusk. The vault's deep, rhythmic hum resonated through thick concrete walls, a constant, comforting presence that had become as familiar as her own heartbeat. For 7 years, she had ended each day this way, cataloging, organizing, preserving the fragments of knowledge that kept their community connected to its past. Her fingers moved with practiced precision as she arranged tonight's collection across her workspace, each document a fragile whisper from a time long past. The air, conditioned and filtered for decades, carried the pleasing scent of aged paper and the subtle metallic tang of the vault's ancient mechanisms, creating an atmosphere of scholarly sanctuary. Tonight's documents spread before her like pieces of an unfinished puzzle. Water-stained memoranda bore the faded letterhead of Vault-Tec Corporation, their edges softened by decades of careful handling. Elena's movements remained deliberate and meditative as she sorted the papers by date, letting the soft click of filing tabs and the whisper of turning pages set her cadence. The climate control baffles hummed their steady rhythm, a lullaby of sustained existence that helped focus her attention on the delicate work at hand. These particular files had arrived in a transfer from Vault 114, part of an ongoing inter-vault sharing initiative that helped communities learn from each other's experiences. The document spoke in the careful euphemisms of corporate communication. References to cultural heritage protocols appeared alongside mentions of adaptive community frameworks and social cohesion parameters. Elena had learned to read between the lines of such language during her archival career, understanding that Vault-Tec's sanitized terminology often concealed more complex realities beneath its bureaucratic veneer. As Elena traced her finger along a faded signature on a personnel directive dated 2 months before the Great War, something caught her attention. In the margin, someone had drawn a small symbol, a simple lamp rendered with careful strokes that seemed oddly personal amid the formal corporate language. The drawing was precise, deliberate, clearly added after the document's original creation. She paused, studying the tiny illustration under her magnifying glass, noting how it included a small dot at the edge of the shade, as if a tiny filament had been illuminated. She turned to the next document, a shipping manifest for educational materials destined for multiple vault facilities. The same lamp symbol appeared here, drawn in what appeared to be the same careful hand. Elena's pulse quickened slightly as she worked through the remaining papers, her training as an archivist guiding her toward methodical documentation rather than hasty conclusions. The lamp appeared 7 more times, always in margins, always drawn with the same measured precision across different documents, different dates, but connected by this mysterious symbol threading through time and bureaucratic boundaries. Under magnification, the lamp symbols revealed subtle variations. Some showed flames, others depicted electric bulbs. A few included tiny radiating lights, suggesting illumination. The differences suggested meaning, perhaps a code that conveyed information to those who knew how to read it. Elena photographed each symbol with her digital camera, noting document context and dates, building the foundation for deeper analysis. The documents themselves hinted at something called Project Nightlight, through fragmentary references embedded within paragraphs discussing resource allocation for cultural enrichment initiatives and logistical challenges in inter-vault curriculum standardization. The references were deliberately incomplete, oblique mentions and coded allusions that suggested the project existed in the shadows of the official record, its true nature carefully obscured. A memory surfaced as Elena worked, A conversation with Cal Morrison, one of Vault-81's senior maintenance workers who had mentioned finding chalk marks in the service tunnels during his early years. Small symbols that seemed to indicate safe passages or important locations. Elena had filed the information away as interesting but unrelated to her archival work. Now she wondered if those chalk marks might have been lamps, part of the same mysterious communication system she was discovering in these documents. She reached for her paperweight, a pre-war snow globe containing a miniature house with a single glowing window. The whimsical artifact had survived the corporate efficiency of vault construction, somehow finding its way to her desk years ago. As Elena held it, the globe caught the warm lamplight, and for a moment, the miniature house seemed to pulse with the same gentle rhythm as the vault's life support systems. The tiny illuminated window created a warm beacon within the glass sphere, echoing the lamp symbols she had just discovered. The connection struck her with quiet clarity. The lamp symbols, the references to heritage protocols, the careful markings in document margins, they all suggested illumination, guidance, the preservation of light in dark places. Someone had been working within Vault-Tec's system to ensure that certain information, certain approaches to community building, wouldn't be lost in the corporate machinery of social engineering. Elena made careful notes in her research journal, documenting the evening's discoveries with the same methodical precision she applied to all her archival work. The euphemisms carried their own weather, cultural delivery, adaptive community frameworks, heritage alignment, phrases that sounded like promises and fences simultaneously. She wrote them in a column, leaving space for future annotations, understanding that the lamp symbols represented the beginning of something larger. As she prepared to close her research for the evening, Elena arranged the documents in a secure folder, marking it with her notation system for future investigation. Tomorrow, she would begin tracing the lamp symbols through other materials in the archive, searching for patterns that might reveal the scope and purpose of this mysterious network. She would speak with Cal about those chalk marks, visit Dr. Chen in hydroponics, where the sound of flowing water made listening easier. The desk lamp cast its steady glow across her organized workspace as Elena settled into the satisfaction of another day's preservation completed. But tonight carried additional anticipation, the excitement of a mystery that promised to illuminate hidden aspects of their community's origins. She adjusted the lamp's position slightly, ensuring its light would be ready for tomorrow's investigations. In the quiet of the archive, surrounded by the gentle whisper of climate control and the soft rhythm of life support systems, Elena Vasquez felt the familiar pull of discovery. The lamp symbols had opened a door to understanding how individual conscience had operated within corporate structures, how small acts of care had shaped the communities that emerged from Vault-Tec's underground cities. The snow globe caught the lamplight one final time as Elena gathered her materials, its tiny illuminated window reflecting the larger mystery she had uncovered. Tomorrow would bring new documents, new connections, and deeper understanding of the network that had worked to preserve something precious within the vast machinery of social control. The lamp still burned, both on her desk and in the margins of history, waiting to reveal its secrets to those patient enough to listen. Dawn filtered through Vault-81's artificial skylights with the measured precision of engineered comfort, the photosensitive panels gradually brightening to simulate natural morning light. Elena had awakened before the scheduled illumination cycle, her mind already turning over the lamp symbols she had discovered the previous evening. The vault's morning sounds began their familiar sequence, the gentle hiss of air recyclers shifting to day mode, the distant hum of hydroponics pumps beginning their first cycle, the soft chime that marked the start of another day in their underground sanctuary. She dressed with the same methodical care she brought to her archival work, selecting her standard-issue Vault jumpsuit and checking the small digital camera she would need for documenting any additional discoveries. The snow globe sat on her nightstand, its tiny illuminated window dark now in the morning light, but the memories of how it had caught the lamplight remained vivid in her mind. Today would bring conversations, careful inquiries, the delicate work of gathering institutional memory without alarming anyone about her investigation. The corridor outside Elena's quarters carried the quiet energy of a community beginning its daily routines. She passed neighbors heading to their various assignments, technicians bound for the reactor level, teachers preparing for morning classes, maintenance workers already carrying their toolkits toward whatever repairs awaited their attention. The vault's social rhythms had evolved over decades into something that felt natural despite their artificial environment, a testament to human adaptability and the careful planning that had gone into their community's design. Elena's first destination was the maintenance section, where Cal Morrison would be beginning his morning equipment checks. She found him in the tool storage area, methodically inspecting wrench sets and diagnostic equipment with the same attention to detail that characterized all successful Vault operations. Cal had worked maintenance for over 30 years, arriving as a young man and growing into one of their most experienced technical specialists. His institutional memory reached back to the Vault's early years, when procedures were still being refined and communities were still discovering how to live within their underground boundaries. "Morning, Elena," Cal greeted her with the easy familiarity of long acquaintance. "Don't usually see you in the maintenance sections this early." "Everything working properly in the archives?" "The equipment's fine, Cal. I was hoping to ask you about something you mentioned once. Those chalk marks you found in the service tunnels when you were starting out. You said they seemed to indicate safe passages or important locations." Cal paused in his inspection of a diagnostic scanner, his expression shifting to the careful concentration of someone reaching back through decades of memory. "Haven't thought about those marks in years. Found them mostly in the lower service areas, places where children might need to shelter during emergency drills. Small symbols, always drawn with the same careful hand. Looked like tiny lamps, actually, though I never knew what they meant." Elena's pulse quickened, but she maintained her scholarly composure. "Do you remember anything else about them? Where they appeared most frequently? Whether they seemed to follow any pattern?" "They were clustered around storage areas mostly, places where educational materials were kept or where children might gather during community activities. The marks always appeared near ventilation access points too, spots where someone could move between levels without using the main corridors." Cal resumed his equipment check, but his voice carried the engagement of someone pleased to find old observations suddenly relevant. "I always figured they were left by one of the early educators. Maybe someone marking safe routes for evacuation procedures." The conversation continued as Elena helped Cal organize his tools, their work creating the comfortable rhythm that made deeper discussion possible. Cal's memories revealed a pattern of symbols that seemed designed to guide movement through the Vault's infrastructure, but always with attention to the needs of children and families rather than purely administrative concerns. The marks had appeared in places where someone might need shelter, guidance, or access to resources during difficult times. Elena thanked Cal and made her way to the hydroponics bay, where Dr. Patricia Chen would be conducting her morning plant assessments. The bay's atmosphere provided perfect conditions for sensitive conversations. The sound of flowing water and humming grow lights created natural acoustic cover, while the work of tending plants established a meditative rhythm that encouraged thoughtful reflection. Dr. Chen moved between the growing beds with practiced efficiency, checking moisture levels and adjusting nutrient flows with the precision of someone who understood that their community's food security depended on careful attention to botanical details. Elena found her examining a section of leafy greens, making notes on a tablet while monitoring the automated systems that maintained optimal growing conditions. "Elena, good morning. Are you here for the monthly archive update on seed storage protocols?" "Actually, Patricia, I wanted to ask about your grandmother. You mentioned once that she worked in education before the war, that she had access to materials that seemed more diverse than typical Vault-Tec curricula. Dr. Chen's attention shifted from her plants to Elena's face, reading the careful interest of someone pursuing meaningful research rather than casual curiosity. Grandmother Chen worked as a cultural consultant for Vault-Tec's educational division. She used to talk about materials that arrived in unmarked shipments, resources that encouraged questioning and discussion rather than rote learning. She called them heritage materials, said they were designed to help communities adapt to changing circumstances rather than just follow predetermined patterns. The conversation unfolded against the gentle background of flowing water and mechanical systems, Doctor. Chen sharing fragments of family memory that painted a picture of educational resources designed to preserve intellectual flexibility alongside cultural knowledge. Her grandmother had spoken of colleagues who worried about the long-term effects of rigid social programming, educators who worked to ensure that communities would retain the ability to think critically and adapt creatively to unforeseen challenges. She mentioned a symbol sometimes, Doctor. Chen continued, adjusting the flow rate on a nutrient line. A small lamp that appeared on certain materials, marking resources that had been enhanced with additional perspectives. Grandmother said it meant the materials contained light for dark times, whatever that meant. Elena documented these conversations in her research journal, building a picture of how the lamp symbol had operated as a recognition sign for educational materials that preserved intellectual freedom alongside cultural knowledge. The pattern suggested a network of concerned individuals who had worked within Vault-Tec's system to ensure that communities would inherit tools for critical thinking and adaptive problem-solving. Back in the archive, Elena began systematically cross-referencing the documents from Vault 114 with Vault 81's own historical shipping manifests. Her methodical approach, honed over years of careful preservation, allowed her to sift through layers of bureaucratic jargon and logistical details. She found numerous entries for cultural adaptation resources, a classification that seemed innocuous enough on the surface. However, when she cross-referenced these entries with the dates and destinations of the documents bearing the lamp symbol, a pattern emerged. These cultural adaptation resources were consistently shipped to vaults designated by Vault-Tec as having experimental social parameters. The specific contents of these shipments remained elusive, still classified under vague headings, but the repeated appearance of the lamp symbol on their manifests suggested a deliberate, targeted distribution. Elena photographed each relevant manifest page, ensuring careful attention to lighting and focus, capturing every detail for later analysis. The implications were significant. Many of the positive characteristics Elena had observed in Vault 81's community culture, their tendency toward collaborative decision-making and thoughtful problem-solving, might have roots in educational materials enhanced by this mysterious network. The lamp symbols in document margins weren't random markings, but indicators of a preservation effort that had shaped their community's intellectual foundations. As afternoon light settled into the archive's familiar rhythms, Elena organized her findings with quiet satisfaction. The Heritage Protocol was beginning to reveal itself as something far more significant than simple educational enhancement. It represented a systematic effort to preserve human dignity and intellectual freedom within corporate structures designed for social control. Tomorrow would bring deeper investigation into these hidden materials and their influence on Vault communities throughout the wasteland. The afternoon light in Vault 81 carried the particular quality of engineered comfort, filtering through the artificial skylights with the measured precision that had sustained their community for decades. Elena's morning conversations with Cal and Doctor Chen had provided crucial context for her investigation, but now the real work began, locating the physical remnants of those mysterious cultural adaptation resources that had appeared so consistently in the shipping manifests marked with lamp symbols. Her research had led her to Storage Annex D-7, a section of the vault that had been repurposed multiple times over the years but retained traces of its original designation in the facility's architectural records. Elena made her way through the lower corridors, where the vault's ambient sounds took on a different character. The life support systems hummed more distantly here, creating pockets of contemplative quiet that seemed designed for careful thought and methodical work. The annex door, sealed for years behind newer storage arrangements, required Cal's assistance to access. The maintenance worker arrived with his characteristic efficiency, producing the appropriate tools and access codes without unnecessary questions. Elena appreciated his understanding that some investigations required patience and discretion rather than immediate explanations. The door opened with the satisfying resistance of well-maintained mechanisms, revealing a space that had been waiting in climate-controlled suspension for someone with the proper curiosity to rediscover its contents. Inside, the air held the distinctive atmosphere of preserved knowledge, cool, dry, carrying the subtle fragrance of aged paper and the metallic tang of archival storage materials. Rows of metal shelving created orderly corridors through the space, and Elena's flashlight beam revealed stacks of containers that bore no obvious identification beyond standard Vault-Tec inventory numbers. However, several boxes in the far corner displayed the familiar lamp symbol, carefully stenciled alongside their official markings. Elena established her documentation routine with the same methodical precision she brought to all archival work. She arranged portable lighting to eliminate shadows, prepared her camera for optimal preservation photography, and began the careful process of opening the first container. The afternoon light, filtered through distant ventilation grates, provided perfect ambient conditions for her work, creating an atmosphere of scholarly sanctuary that helped focus her attention on the delicate task at hand. The contents exceeded her expectations in both scope and sophistication. These were not the standard educational materials she had catalogued throughout her career, but alternative resources that approached learning from entirely different philosophical foundations. Where typical Vault-Tec curricula presented simplified narratives and predetermined conclusions, these materials offered comparative perspectives, encouraged questioning, and provided frameworks for independent critical thinking. Elena found herself examining educational primers that presented multiple viewpoints on pre-war American history, cultural anthologies featuring diverse voices and experiences, and discussion guides designed to help communities navigate complex social and ethical questions. Each item was professionally produced but carried subtle enhancements: additional reading lists, supplementary historical documents, and discussion prompts that encouraged collaborative exploration rather than rote memorization. The lamp symbol appeared throughout these materials with systematic precision. Sometimes it was integrated into illustrations, sometimes etched discreetly into document corners, but always indicating content that had been enhanced beyond its official specifications. Elena began to understand that the symbol served as a recognition sign for materials that preserved intellectual freedom alongside cultural knowledge, marking resources that contained what Dr. Chen's grandmother had called light for dark times. Among the educational resources, Elena discovered bound volumes of correspondence that revealed the human architects behind this preservation effort. Dr. Patricia Hawthorne emerged as a central figure, a cultural anthropologist whose letters expressed profound concern about the ethical implications of Vault-Tec's social engineering programs. Her correspondence with colleagues across multiple facilities painted a picture of dedicated professionals grappling with moral complexities while working within corporate constraints. Hawthorne's margins were filled with probing questions that revealed someone deeply troubled by her work's implications. How can authentic consent operate within closed social systems? What are the long-term psychological effects of curated historical narratives? Are we preserving culture or merely creating sophisticated propaganda? Her handwriting showed the careful precision of someone documenting ethical concerns for future accountability. The correspondence revealed that the Heritage Protocol operated as a dual program. Officially, it was designed to preserve selected cultural values for post-war reconstruction. However, Hawthorne and her network had systematically enhanced these materials to preserve intellectual diversity, critical thinking skills, and cultural adaptability that would allow communities to evolve beyond their original programming as circumstances required. Elena discovered evidence of what the network called cultural care packages, collections of enhanced educational materials secretly distributed to select vaults through maintenance channels and educational supply lines. These packages were carefully designed to appear compatible with official curricula while providing tools for deeper understanding and independent analysis. The network had identified communities that would face particular challenges with rigid social programming and worked to ensure they inherited resources for adaptive problem-solving. The materials included practical guides for implementing these enhanced educational approaches within corporate oversight constraints. Elena found a slim manual titled Heritage Implementation Practices that provided detailed instructions for embedding discussion prompts within official lessons, staging comparative historical analysis without triggering administrative concerns, and training networks of educators, maintenance workers, and administrators who could preserve intellectual freedom through small, consistent choices. As Elena continued her documentation, the scope of the network's influence became clear. Personnel files revealed the professional risks taken by network members, disciplinary actions for curriculum irregularities, transfers between facilities, and careers disrupted by efforts to maintain the Heritage Protocol's operations while avoiding corporate detection. These were not revolutionary activists, but careful professionals who made systematic choices to preserve human dignity within institutional constraints. The shipping manifests. Elena had been tracking told the logistical story of this distribution network. Enhanced materials were consistently sent to vaults designated with experimental social parameters, suggesting that the Heritage Protocol was designed to provide communities with tools for navigating the psychological challenges of their vault's original mission. The network had created a shadow archive of authentic cultural materials alongside Vault-Tec's curated narratives. Elena's research revealed that many positive characteristics of Vault 81's community culture, their collaborative decision-making approaches, healthy skepticism toward rigid authority, and ability to adapt Vault protocols to changing circumstances, had roots in educational materials enhanced by the Heritage Protocol network. The lamp symbols in document margins represented a preservation effort that had shaped the intellectual foundations of entire societies in ways their original architects could never have anticipated. As afternoon settled into evening, Elena completed her initial documentation with quiet satisfaction. Her photographs captured not just physical evidence, but the careful thought and ethical commitment that had guided the network's preservation efforts. Tomorrow would bring the next phase of her investigation, reaching out to archivists and historians in other Vault communities to understand how widely the Heritage Protocol had influenced post-war civilization. The lamp still burned, both on her desk and in the margins of history, waiting to illuminate the full scope of how individual conscience had shaped the communities that emerged from Vault-Tec's underground cities. Elena sealed the Heritage Protocol materials back into their protective containers, understanding that her investigation had uncovered something far more significant than historical curiosity. Evidence of humanity's persistent capacity to preserve freedom and dignity, even within the most comprehensive systems of social control. The evening settled around Elena with the Vault's characteristic embrace of engineered comfort, the life support systems shifting to their nocturnal rhythm as she made her way to the communications center. Her discovery of the Heritage Protocol materials demanded broader investigation, If such careful preservation efforts had operated within Vault 81, logic suggested similar patterns might exist throughout the network of Vault communities scattered across the wasteland. The Inter-Vault Communication Array offered the most promising avenue for this expanded inquiry, its web of radio frequencies and data protocols connecting isolated communities across vast distances of irradiated landscape. Communications specialist Ben Carter greeted Elena with the quiet efficiency that characterized all successful Vault operations. The center hummed with its perpetual blend of electronic precision and distant voices, the air carrying the clean scent of ozone and the rhythmic pulse of data transmission. Ben understood Elena's preference for methodical work and prepared the equipment with careful attention to optimal signal clarity and secure transmission protocols. "I need to reach archivists in other established Vault communities," Elena explained, settling into the operator's chair with the same deliberate preparation she brought to all scholarly endeavors. "I'm investigating educational materials from the pre-war period, specifically resources marked with an unusual symbol, a small lamp. The pattern suggests a broader network that I need to understand." Ben's fingers moved across the console with practiced precision, establishing connections through the delicate infrastructure that bound Vault communities together despite the hostile environment above. Each transmission required careful negotiation with atmospheric interference and equipment limitations, but the network had evolved over decades into a sophisticated system for sharing knowledge and maintaining cultural continuity across the wasteland's scattered settlements. Elena's first contact reached Dr. Sarah Kim, lead archivist at Vault 111, whose community had developed one of the Commonwealth's most comprehensive post-war archives. Their professional relationship stretched back through years of collaborative documentation projects built on shared commitment to thorough historical preservation and careful analysis. The radio crackled with familiar static before Dr. Kim's voice emerged with its characteristic precision and warmth. "Elena, it's good to hear from you. Your inquiry about heritage protocol materials is quite timely. We've been cataloging similar discoveries in our own archives. Educational resources that don't match standard Vault-Tec specifications, marked with the same lamp symbol you described." Dr. Kim's confirmation sent a quiet thrill through Elena's scholarly instincts. Vault 111's archives contained materials that paralleled her own findings, educational primers that emphasized critical thinking over rote learning, historical resources that presented multiple perspectives rather than sanitized, narratives and discussion frameworks designed to encourage community dialogue and adaptive problem-solving. Dr. Kim agreed to transmit digitized copies through their secure data-sharing protocols. "Our community's governance structures show clear influence from these enhanced materials," Dr. Kim continued, her voice carrying the satisfaction of someone solving a long-standing puzzle. "We've always wondered why our decision-making processes felt more collaborative than what we'd expect from standard Vault-Tec programming. The heritage protocol materials provide the missing connection." Elena documented these parallels in her research journal, understanding that the network's influence had extended far beyond individual Vault communities. The patterns suggested systematic efforts to preserve intellectual freedom across multiple facilities, creating foundations for the diverse, resilient societies that had emerged throughout the post-war landscape. Her next contact reached Jacob Martinez, a trader who specialized in pre-war artifacts and had developed extensive knowledge of abandoned Vault-Tec facilities throughout the wasteland. Jacob's mobile communication setup allowed him to participate in the Intervault network from various locations, and his unique perspective provided insights into how heritage protocol materials had survived outside official archives. "I've found similar educational resources in abandoned facilities." Jacob's voice carried through atmospheric interference with the authority of someone who had encountered these materials in multiple contexts. Always in storage areas separate from main supplies, marked with that lamp symbol. The content was different, more questioning, more diverse in perspective than standard corporate materials. Jacob's discoveries revealed that the Heritage Protocol network had operated beyond active Vault communities, establishing caches of enhanced materials in facilities that were abandoned or never fully occupied. These hidden archives suggested that network members had planned for various contingencies, ensuring intellectual resources would survive even if primary distribution systems failed. Elena's third conversation connected her with Maria Santos, an elderly educator from Vault 76 who had worked in pre-war educational systems before the bombs fell. Santos provided crucial first-hand perspective on how the Heritage Protocol had operated within corporate constraints, her memories revealing the human faces behind the systematic preservation efforts. "We knew we were walking a careful line," Santos explained, her voice carrying decades of thoughtful reflection. "The official curricula served corporate purposes, but we also understood our responsibility to preserve authentic educational approaches. The lamp symbol helped us recognize materials that had been enhanced with additional perspectives and critical thinking exercises. These conversations revealed the Heritage Protocol as something far more significant than Elena had initially imagined. The network had operated across multiple Vault facilities through maintenance channels, educational departments, and administrative systems. The lamp symbol served as a recognition sign for materials that preserved intellectual freedom alongside cultural knowledge, creating a shadow archive of authentic resources that operated parallel to official corporate curricula. Elena's documentation expanded to include transmission logs, shared digital files, and collaborative analysis with colleagues who understood the importance of preserving complex historical truth. The Heritage Protocol emerged as a network of concerned individuals who had worked within Vault-Tec's system to ensure that communities would inherit tools for independent thinking and adaptive problem-solving, rather than just rigid social programming. The evening's conversations also revealed ongoing effects of the Heritage Protocol's influence. Communities with access to enhanced materials had developed more collaborative governance structures, stronger traditions of ethical decision-making, and greater cultural adaptability in facing post-war challenges. The network's efforts to preserve critical thinking skills had created foundations that continued to shape wasteland civilization decades after the original materials had been distributed. As Elena concluded her radio contacts and began analyzing the digital files her colleagues had shared, she understood that her investigation had uncovered evidence of humanity's persistent capacity to preserve dignity and freedom within comprehensive systems of control. The Heritage Protocol represented not just historical curiosity, but ongoing cultural influence that continued to shape how communities approached problems, made decisions, and adapted to changing circumstances. The lamp symbols in document margins had revealed a preservation network that operated through quiet acts of professional conscience, ensuring that alternative perspectives would survive alongside official narratives. Elena's research was documenting not just past events, but ongoing cultural DNA that honored both heritage and hope, creating foundations for the diverse, adaptive societies that characterize the best aspects of post-war reconstruction. Tomorrow would bring deeper analysis of the materials her colleagues had shared, expanding her understanding of how individual acts of ethical courage had rippled through generations to influence entire civilizations. The network's true scope was beginning to emerge, a systematic effort to preserve human dignity that had operated in the shadows of corporate control, ensuring that future generations would inherit not just survival, but the tools to shape their own destinies with wisdom and compassion. The digital files from Dr. Kim arrived during the Vault's quiet hours, their soft electronic hum joining the familiar symphony of climate control and distant machinery that had become Elena's evening companion. She arranged the transmitted materials across her workspace with the same methodical precision she brought to all archival endeavors, understanding that these personnel records would transform the Heritage Protocol from institutional pattern into human story. The lamp's steady glow gathered the documents into focus, revealing the individual faces behind what she had begun to understand as a network of quiet professional rebellion. Elena began with Dr. Patricia Hawthorne's complete personnel file, watching decades of careful navigation unfold through performance evaluations and assignment records. Hawthorne's career trajectory revealed sophisticated understanding of corporate psychology. Her early reviews praised innovative approaches to cultural preservation, while later evaluations expressed concern about curriculum irregularities and excessive community autonomy emphasis. Elena recognized the careful dance of someone preserving ethical principles within structures designed for control. The files revealed that Hawthorne had been systematically transferred between Vault facilities, each reassignment officially justified as career development, but creating opportunities to establish heritage protocol networks across multiple communities. Her internal memos, disguised as routine logistical updates, contained coded reference to supplementary materials and enrichment opportunities that Elena now understood as enhanced educational resources. Hawthorne had developed euphemistic language that satisfied corporate oversight while achieving substantive preservation of intellectual freedom. Thomas Chen's maintenance records from Vault 114 provided parallel documentation of the network's physical infrastructure. His work logs showed obsessive attention to service tunnel documentation, accompanied by detailed sketches that included safety markers and guidance indicators. Elena recognized these as the chalk lamp symbols that created navigation networks for children and hidden distribution points for heritage materials. Chen's legitimate access to infrastructure had enabled the creation of alternative communication channels that operated beneath administrative awareness. Elena cross-referenced these patterns with Maria Santos's educational records, discovering subtle anomalies that revealed systematic curriculum enhancement. Santos's supply requisitions consistently requested supplementary cultural materials beyond standard requirements, while her lesson plans emphasized comparative historical analysis and community discussion frameworks that appeared nowhere in official Vault-Tec guidelines. Her student evaluations praised critical thinking over standardized compliance, directly contradicting corporate educational objectives while producing superior community outcomes. The network's coordination impressed Elena with its sophisticated understanding of institutional behavior. Maintenance workers like Chen created physical distribution systems, educators like Santos implemented enhanced teaching approaches, and administrators like Hawthorne provided resource allocation and protective oversight. They operated through professional relationships built on shared ethical commitment rather than formal hierarchy, using coded communications and carefully timed transfers to spread their influence across multiple facilities. Elena discovered evidence of cultural care packages, collections of enhanced materials disguised as routine educational supplies or maintenance resources. These packages contained uncensored historical documents, philosophical texts challenging authoritarianism, diverse cultural narratives, and discussion frameworks designed to encourage independent thinking. The shipping manifests she had been tracking revealed the logistical sophistication required to distribute these materials without triggering corporate oversight systems. The personnel files documented significant professional costs for heritage protocol participation. Chen faced disciplinary actions for excessive infrastructure attention. Santos was denied promotions for curriculum standardization failures, and Hawthorne experienced career stagnation despite exceptional qualifications. These were not revolutionary activists, but careful professionals who made systematic choices to preserve human dignity through small, consistent acts of conscience, understanding that gradual cultural influence would prove more durable than dramatic gestures. Elena found records of informal training workshops disguised as professional development seminars where sympathetic employees learned to identify enhanced materials, use coded communications, and encourage critical thinking within their respective roles. The workshops emphasized discretion, patience, and trust building rather than formal organization. Network members understood that their effectiveness depended on maintaining corporate compatibility while achieving substantive educational enhancement. The most significant discovery was evidence of how heritage protocol influence had shaped specific Vault communities over generations. Educational approaches emphasizing collaboration over hierarchy had created governance structures that adapted more successfully to post-war challenges. Communities with access to diverse historical perspectives developed flexible cultural identities capable of incorporating new information without social disruption. The network's preservation of critical thinking skills had created foundations for the resilient, adaptive societies that characterized successful wasteland reconstruction. Elena recognized many positive characteristics she'd observed in inter-Vault cooperation: willingness to share resources, collaborative problem-solving, open communication across ideological differences, had roots in educational materials, enhanced by the Heritage Protocol network. The lamp symbols in document margins represented preservation efforts that had shaped the intellectual DNA of entire civilizations in ways their original architects never anticipated. As Elena completed her analysis, she understood that the Heritage Protocol represented systematic proof of humanity's capacity to preserve dignity within comprehensive control systems. Network members had worked within corporate structures to ensure future generations inherited not just survival protocols, but tools for ethical reasoning and cultural adaptation. Their quiet rebellion had been custodial rather than confrontational, tending both machines and minds with equal care. The lamp still burned on her desk, its steady circle of light echoing the countless small illuminations the network had preserved throughout Vault civilization. Elena's research was documenting not just historical events, but ongoing cultural influence that continued shaping how communities approached problems, made decisions, and preserved human values despite technological and social challenges. Tomorrow would bring physical exploration of Vault 81's service tunnels, where she would trace the network's legacy through chalk symbols and hidden caches that had guided children and preserved knowledge for decades. The investigation had revealed individual acts of professional conscience that had rippled through generations, creating foundations for intellectual freedom that survived even the most comprehensive attempts at social engineering. Elena organized her findings with quiet satisfaction, understanding that her documentation would help preserve the network's legacy for future generations who would need their own tools for maintaining human dignity within whatever systems emerged from the wasteland's ongoing reconstruction. The morning found Elena preparing for physical exploration with the same methodical precision she brought to all scholarly endeavors, but today, her research would take her beyond the comfortable boundaries of archive rooms into the infrastructure that formed Vault 81's hidden circulatory system. Her analysis of Heritage Protocol personnel files had revealed that individuals like Cal Morrison used their maintenance access to create physical networks alongside the educational materials she had been documenting. The chalk lamp symbols, once mysterious markings, now represented a deliberate communication system operating within the Vault's mechanical arteries. Cal met her at maintenance access, point C7 with his characteristic efficiency, carrying portable lighting equipment and the safety gear required for service tunnel exploration. His institutional memory reached back to the Vault's early years, when procedures were still evolving and communities were discovering how to transform corporate blueprints into livable spaces. Elena appreciated his understanding that some investigations required patience and careful observation rather than predetermined conclusions. The symbols were most concentrated in the lower service areas, Cal explained as they descended through the maintenance H into spaces that existed parallel to the vault's official corridors. Places where children might need shelter during emergency drills or where families could gather during community activities. They always appeared near ventilation access points and emergency supply locations. The service tunnels carried their own atmosphere, cooler than the main corridors, filled with the mechanical rhythms of pumps and filtration systems that sustained life within their underground sanctuary. Elena's portable lights revealed walls marked by decades of careful maintenance, where pipe joints showed the attention of conscientious workers, and electrical conduits bore the precise labeling that characterized successful technical operations. Among these legitimate markings, the lamp symbols appeared with subtle persistence. The transition was immediate and profound. The polished surfaces and even lighting of the main vault gave way to rough concrete and exposed infrastructure. The air grew cooler, carrying the metallic tang of old piping and the subtle scent of undisturbed spaces. The vault's deep hum, always present, seemed to intensify here, resonating through the very structure that supported their community above. Elena documented each symbol with careful photography, noting their placement relative to emergency equipment, ventilation systems, and access routes that connected different levels of the vault's infrastructure. The symbols varied in execution. Some showed simple flames, others depicted electric bulbs, a few included radiating lines suggesting illumination, but all shared the same careful precision that suggested deliberate communication rather than random marking. It was in a narrow passage, tucked behind a cluster of data cables, that Elena found the first clear lamp symbol. The white chalk had faded but remained unmistakable on the rough concrete wall, a simple light bulb shape with faint radiating lines suggesting illumination. Cal paused, his headlamp beam settling on the mark. "That's one of them," he confirmed quietly. "Always near places that felt overlooked but important." The patterns revealed sophisticated understanding of child psychology and emergency procedures. Lamp symbols appeared at decision points where children might need guidance during evacuations, near supply caches where families could find resources during extended sheltering, and along routes that connected educational areas with safe spaces. The markings created a secondary navigation system designed for the vault's most vulnerable residents. As they explored deeper, Elena encountered Mr. Lou, an elderly resident who had volunteered to share his memories of the symbol's significance during his childhood. He waited on a maintenance bench, his cane resting against the wall as he smiled at Elena's documentation efforts. "We called them story lamps," Mr. Liu explained, examining Elena's photographs of the chalk symbols. "If you found one, it meant a safe spot where someone kept books or extra water. During drills, the older children would guide the younger ones by following the lamps. We thought our teachers left them there, but maybe it was more than that." His memories provided crucial context for Elena's discoveries. The symbols had served multiple functions within the Heritage Protocol network, providing guidance during emergencies, indicating locations where enhanced educational materials had been cached, and creating communication points for network members. The service tunnels had become conduits for both mechanical systems and cultural preservation. In a small alcove behind a ventilation unit, Elena discovered a sturdy metal box bearing the familiar lamp symbol etched into its lid. Inside, carefully wrapped in moisture-resistant fabric, were several items that immediately confirmed her understanding of the network's operations. A well-worn primer on collaborative governance contained annotations in neat handwriting. Alongside it, a collection of stories from diverse pre-war cultures emphasized themes of empathy and adaptation. Laminated cards presented complex ethical dilemmas with open-ended discussion questions designed to encourage critical thinking. These were not the rigid, propagandistic materials typical of standard Vault-Tec curricula, but tools for developing independent thought and compassionate decision-making. Elena photographed each item with meticulous care, understanding that these caches represented seeds planted by the Heritage Protocol network, waiting for future generations to discover and nurture. Cal pointed to smaller chalk marks radiating from the cache location. They'd sometimes leave little breadcrumbs like these, he explained softly. Just enough to let someone know something was there if they were looking carefully enough. The system operated on trust and shared understanding of subtle cues, a quiet rebellion conducted through the Vault's own infrastructure. Elena realized that the network's influence had been woven into Vault 81's community fabric in ways that transcended formal education. Children who had used these marked tunnels during drills, perhaps unconsciously following the lamp symbols, had absorbed lessons of guidance and quiet care. The subtle presence of alternative materials, even if never formally introduced, had created an undercurrent of intellectual freedom that shaped community values across generations. The exploration revealed how individual acts of conscience had been translated into physical systems of support and guidance. The Heritage Protocol had operated not just through educational enhancement, but through the creation of spaces where questioning and discussion could occur naturally, away from administrative oversight. As they emerged from the service tunnels back into the familiar, regulated light of the main corridors, Elena understood that her investigation had uncovered evidence of systematic cultural cultivation. The lamp symbols connected document margins to physical spaces, creating a comprehensive picture of how patient attention to both mechanical systems and human development had shaped their community. The very fact that Vault 81 had developed strong traditions of collaborative decision-making and healthy skepticism toward rigid authority now made profound sense. These were not accidental developments, but the long-term harvest of seeds planted by the Heritage Protocol network. The community's unique cultural characteristics, its capacity for adaptive governance and emphasis on collective problem-solving, represented a living testament to the network's patient preservation efforts. Elena's documentation would help preserve understanding of how the Heritage Protocol had operated through physical infrastructure as well as educational materials. Tomorrow would bring investigation into how these grassroots preservation efforts had intersected with official authority structures, revealing whether sympathetic overseers had provided the institutional protection that allowed such networks to flourish within Vault-Tec's comprehensive control systems. The afternoon light in Vault 81 carried Elena back from the service tunnels with chalk dust on her jumpsuit and profound questions settling in her mind like sediment in still water. The physical evidence of Heritage Protocol operations, the lamp symbols, the hidden caches, the carefully marked navigation routes, had revealed sophisticated networks operating within the Vault's infrastructure. Yet such extensive activities would have required either extraordinary secrecy or institutional protection from those with ultimate authority over Vault operations. The answer lay in understanding how Vault overseers had navigated the delicate balance between corporate loyalty and community welfare. Elena's request for access to classified overseer materials required formal justification through proper archival channels, but her research had established sufficient scholarly foundation to warrant administrative review. The Vault's current governance structures evolved over decades from rigid corporate hierarchy into collaborative decision-making systems, demonstrated how Heritage Protocol influence had shaped institutional culture in ways that would have surprised Vault-Tec's original planners. The very fact that Elena's investigation was proceeding with official support reflected these transformed approaches to transparency and community engagement. The restricted materials arrived in a secure container bearing authentication seals that spoke to their sensitivity within Vault operations. Elena established her documentation routine with particular care, understanding that these records would illuminate the complex moral landscape that Vault leadership had been required to navigate since their community's inception. Her desk lamp cast its familiar circle of warm light across documents that had shaped their underground society in ways most residents never fully understood. Overseer Margaret Chen's training materials, dated mere months before the Great War, revealed extraordinary pressures faced by Vault leadership. The curriculum included detailed protocols for implementing social cohesion parameters and maintaining cultural stability metrics. Euphemistic language that Elena now recognized as comprehensive behavioral control systems. However, Chen's personal annotations revealed someone deeply troubled by the ethical implications of her assigned responsibilities. How can authentic community development occur within predetermined social frameworks? She had written alongside a section on educational oversight. Her questions echoed those Elena had found in Dr. Hawthorne's correspondence, suggesting ethical concerns extended throughout Vault-Tec's hierarchy. Elena discovered that overseer training included classified briefings about the true nature of Vault experiments, information that created profound moral conflicts for individuals tasked with implementing programs they understood to be potentially harmful. Chen's private journal, written in careful script during her early years as overseer, documented her gradual recognition of the Heritage Protocol network and her decision to provide institutional protection for their preservation efforts. "I cannot prevent the experiment," she had written, "but I can ensure that alternative perspectives survive alongside it." The records revealed how Chen had navigated these challenges through careful administrative decisions that consistently created cover for network activities. Maintenance schedules provided extended access to service areas where lamp symbols guided preservation work. Educational supply approvals included supplementary materials that enhanced standard curricula with critical thinking resources. Personnel assignments placed sympathetic individuals in key positions throughout the Vault's operational structure, creating protective networks that operated within official channels while achieving substantive cultural preservation. Elena found evidence of delicate communication between Chen and Heritage Protocol coordinators, conducted through official channels but using coded language that satisfied corporate oversight while coordinating preservation activities. Chen's administrative reports consistently praised cultural stability and educational effectiveness, while quietly protecting the very activities that challenged Vault-Tec's rigid programming objectives. The overseer's position required constant navigation between corporate expectations and community welfare, with Heritage Protocol providing crucial support for leaders who chose humanity over protocol. Through inter-Vault archival exchanges, Elena examined comparable records from other communities, revealing how different overseer choices had led to dramatically different outcomes. Overseer Bartholomew Thorne from Vault 114 had requested supplementary educational materials, justified as necessary for broader cultural context to mitigate psychological stresses of confined living. His requests aligned suspiciously with Heritage Protocol resources, and lamp symbols appeared in margins of approved requisitions, quiet recognition between sympathetic leadership and preservation networks. Conversely, Elena discovered communities where overseers had strictly adhered to corporate protocols, creating rigid, hierarchical societies that struggled with adaptation and innovation. Vault 95's authoritarian structures demonstrated efficient order but limited cultural flexibility, while communities with Heritage Protocol influence had developed collaborative governance systems capable of addressing complex challenges through collective problem-solving. The contrast illustrated how individual leadership choices had rippled through generations to shape entire civilizations. Elena found correspondence between sympathetic overseers across multiple facilities, sharing concerns about experimental ethics and coordinating protection for Heritage Protocol operations. These leaders had created informal networks of institutional support that operated parallel to official corporate communications, ensuring preservation efforts could continue despite administrative oversight and personnel transfers. The lamp symbol appeared in these communications as well, marking correspondence that contained coded support for cultural preservation activities. The personal costs of maintaining this delicate balance became clear through Chen's later journal entries. She faced regular corporate evaluations that questioned her community's excessive autonomy and irregular cultural development, requiring careful justification of outcomes that actually represented heritage protocol successes. Her leadership demanded constant moral navigation between institutional loyalty and ethical responsibility, with each decision carrying potential consequences for both her career and her community's future development. Elena discovered that Chen's leadership style had deliberately emphasized collaborative decision-making and transparent governance, gradually shifting institutional culture away from rigid hierarchy toward collective problem-solving approaches that characterized their current community. These changes occurred slowly, through patient attention to both corporate requirements and community needs, creating foundations for the adaptive, resilient society that emerged from their underground sanctuary. One particularly poignant entry revealed Chen's understanding of her role's deeper implications. Authority is a room with windows. Our task is to keep them opening and closing with the weather. The metaphor captured the delicate balance required. Maintaining enough corporate compliance to avoid intervention while creating sufficient flexibility for authentic cultural development to occur naturally. As Elena completed her analysis, she understood that heritage protocol success had depended on sympathetic leadership at multiple levels of Vault administration. Individual acts of conscience by maintenance workers, educators, and administrators had been supported by institutional protection from overseers who recognized their ethical responsibility to preserve human dignity within corporate experimental frameworks. The lamp still burned on her desk, its steady illumination echoing the careful balance that leaders like Chen had maintained between corporate compliance and community welfare. Elena's investigation had revealed how institutional support had been crucial for grassroots preservation efforts, creating foundations for intellectual freedom that continued shaping Vault civilization decades after the original network's operations. Tomorrow would bring investigation into how these preservation efforts had influenced record-keeping and historical documentation practices, revealing how different approaches to archival work had shaped community understanding of their own development and relationship with Vault origins. The Heritage Protocol's influence extended beyond education and governance into the very foundations of cultural memory and institutional identity. The morning light in Vault 81 carried Elena from the complex moral landscape of overseer records into the quieter realm of her own professional practice, where she began to recognize patterns she had previously accepted as standard archival methodology. Her investigation into heritage protocol influence had revealed how educational materials and institutional leadership had been shaped by preservation networks. But now she needed to examine the foundational layer that made all other cultural work possible, the systematic approaches to documentation and historical memory that determined what communities remembered and how they understood their own development. Elena arranged her workspace with the familiar precision of decades spent in careful preservation, but today her desk lamp illuminated documents from her own archives alongside materials from other Vault communities. The inter-Vault digital sharing protocols hummed quietly through her terminal, connecting her investigation to the broader network of archivists and historians who had unknowingly inherited heritage protocol methodologies through professional mentorship and collaborative practice. Her analysis began with Vault 81's master cataloging system, examining notation patterns she had used for years without questioning their origins. The Vault's approach to historical documentation emphasized comprehensive context over simplified narrative, preserving multiple perspectives on community events rather than single authoritative accounts. Elena discovered that official meeting minutes were consistently paired with supplementary materials, personal reflections from participants, dissenting viewpoints that hadn't prevailed in formal votes, and contextual notes that captured the emotional and social dynamics behind community decisions. These supplementary records bore subtle markings that Elena now recognized as evolved versions of the Heritage Protocol's lamp symbol. Small notations that appeared as decorative elements in document headers or as barely visible watermarks in digital file metadata. The symbols marked materials that had been enhanced with additional context, alternative perspectives, and analytical frameworks designed to encourage ongoing interpretation rather than passive acceptance of historical events. Elena contacted Dr. Rebecca Torres at Vault-92, whose community had developed particularly sophisticated documentation practices that preserved intellectual complexity alongside historical accuracy. Their professional relationship had evolved through years of collaborative preservation projects, and Dr. Torres's insights revealed systematic differences in how Heritage Protocol influence had shaped archival culture throughout the Vault network. "We maintain what we call contextual documentation," Dr. Torres explained through the secure communication channel. "Rather than preserving single narratives about community events, we document the deliberative process, who raised concerns, what alternatives were considered, how decisions evolved through discussion. Our archives treat history as ongoing conversation rather than settled conclusion." This approach contrasted sharply with standard corporate documentation practices, which typically emphasized efficiency and predetermined outcomes over comprehensive understanding. Elena recognized that her own professional training had emphasized similar methodologies, preserving dissenting opinions alongside majority decisions, maintaining personal accounts with equal status to official reports, and creating accessible records that encouraged public engagement with historical complexity. Through systematic analysis of archival practices across multiple communities, Elena discovered how different approaches to historical preservation had shaped community culture and governance over generations. Vault communities with comprehensive, transparent documentation had developed stronger traditions of democratic participation and collective problem-solving. Residents who understood their community's complex origins through detailed historical records were better equipped to navigate contemporary challenges with wisdom and adaptability. Elena examined specific examples that illustrated these patterns. Vault 88's archives emphasized institutional efficiency and social stability, creating narratives that portrayed community development as inevitable and predetermined. Residents of such communities displayed strong institutional loyalty but limited capacity for independent analysis of community challenges or alternative approaches to problem-solving. Their historical understanding reinforced existing power structures rather than encouraging critical examination of governance approaches. Conversely, communities with Heritage Protocol influence in their archival practices had preserved the complexity of their development, documenting both successes and failures with equal attention to the reasoning processes that had guided community decisions. These archives served as educational resources that helped residents understand how democratic culture operated in practice, providing models for thoughtful participation in collective decision-making. Elena discovered evidence of Heritage Protocol training materials specifically designed for archival professionals, methodologies that emphasized preserving intellectual diversity alongside historical accuracy. These approaches had been transmitted through informal professional networks that operated parallel to official corporate training programs, creating alternative traditions of historical documentation that prioritized comprehensive understanding over simplified narrative. The investigation revealed how sympathetic archivists had worked within corporate constraints to preserve materials that might otherwise have been lost or marginalized. Personal journals, community discussions, and unofficial records were carefully catalogued under innocuous classifications that satisfied administrative oversight, while ensuring their availability for future researchers and community members seeking deeper understanding of their origins. Elena found correspondence between heritage protocol archivists across multiple facilities, sharing methodologies and supporting each other's efforts to maintain comprehensive historical documentation. The lamp symbol appeared in these communications as recognition of materials that contained enhanced historical context and analytical frameworks designed to encourage critical thinking about community development. Her analysis revealed that archival work had served as crucial foundation for democratic culture within Vault communities. Historical documentation practices that emphasized transparency and complexity created informed citizenry capable of thoughtful participation in collective decision-making, while communities with limited documentation approaches sometimes struggled with authoritarian tendencies and resistance to necessary adaptation. Elena recognized that her own professional development had been shaped by these alternative archival approaches, passed down through mentorship relationships with archivists who had maintained heritage protocol connections. Her emphasis on comprehensive documentation, public accessibility, and ongoing historical interpretation reflected methodologies designed to preserve intellectual freedom and encourage critical thinking about community development. As evening settled around the archive, Elena understood that her investigation had revealed how individual choices about historical documentation had rippled through generations to shape community identity and democratic culture. The Heritage Protocol's influence on archival practice had created foundations for the intervault communication and collaboration networks that now characterized post-war Vault civilization. The lamp still burned on her desk, its steady illumination echoing the countless careful choices that archivists throughout the Vault network had made to preserve complex truths alongside simple narratives. Elena's documentation would help preserve understanding of how archival work served as foundation for democratic culture and informed citizenship, ensuring that future generations would inherit not just historical records, but the tools for ongoing interpretation and critical analysis that would guide their continuing adaptation to an ever-changing world. The morning after Elena's deep exploration of archival practices found her walking through Vault 81's education wing, where the soft murmur of children's voices created a gentle counterpoint to the mechanical rhythms that sustained their underground community. Her investigation into how heritage protocol influence had shaped documentation and historical memory now required understanding its most crucial impact, how these preservation efforts had affected the children who would inherit their transformed society and carry its values into an uncertain future. Elena paused outside classroom C4, where Mrs. Sarah Martinez was conducting a morning discussion circle with 18 children whose ages ranged from 7 to 13. The room's atmosphere differed markedly from the rigid instruction protocols Elena remembered from standard Vault-Tec educational frameworks. These children sat in a comfortable circle on floor mats, their bright faces reflecting curiosity and engagement as they examined laminated scenario cards that bore subtle watermarks of lamp symbols in their corners. "How would we design the kindest evacuation route if the main elevator stopped working?" Mrs. Martinez asked, holding up a card showing a simplified Vault layout. 10-year-old David Chen traced the corridors with his finger, suggesting, "We make pairs so nobody walks alone, and we leave chalk lamps at safe spots for people following behind." His classmate Maria added, "The lamps should say things like, 'Water this way,' or 'Wait in bright places.'" Elena documented their responses with quiet satisfaction, recognizing critical thinking approaches that emphasized collaborative problem-solving over rigid compliance. After the lesson concluded, Elena interviewed Mrs. Martinez about her teaching philosophy and training. "We received enhanced materials that emphasized contextual learning," the educator explained, her voice carrying the measured precision of someone who understood education as cultural stewardship, rather than teaching children what to think about. Our Vault's history, we focus on how to think, how to ask good questions, consider multiple perspectives, and make ethical decisions together. Elena discovered that contemporary educational materials throughout Vault 81 carried forward heritage protocol methodologies through subtle enhancements. History texts presented multiple viewpoints on community events. Science curricula emphasized experimental thinking and hypothesis testing, and literature selections included diverse voices that challenged students to consider different cultural approaches to common human experiences. The lamp symbol had evolved into design elements that marked resources enhanced with discussion frameworks and critical thinking exercises. Through inter-vault communication, Elena connected with educators from other communities, revealing dramatic differences in educational approaches. Dr. Rebecca Torres from Vault 92 described curricula that preserved intellectual complexity alongside historical accuracy, while records from Vault 75 showed rigid adherence to original corporate protocols that emphasized behavioral compliance over independent thinking. The contrast illuminated how heritage protocol influence had created foundations for democratic culture in some communities, while others maintained authoritarian educational structures. Elena interviewed 12-year-old James Morrison, whose articulate responses demonstrated sophisticated understanding of community ethics. "Our vault was supposed to test social control," he explained with remarkable clarity. "But the people who lived here chose cooperation instead. That's why we vote on important decisions and everyone participates in community meetings." His comfort with questioning authority and examining institutional practices reflected intellectual foundations that would enable continued adaptation to changing circumstances. Conversations with parents revealed ongoing debates about transparency regarding Vault origins and Vault-Tec's experimental intentions. Dr. Patricia Chen, whose family had heritage protocol connections, described household discussions that emphasized ethical complexity. "We tell our children that their community exists because people made difficult choices to preserve what was good while changing what wasn't working. That helps them understand they have similar responsibilities." Other families maintained more protective narratives, believing gradual revelation would better serve childhood development. Elena observed a civic mentorship session where older students learned facilitation skills from Tessa, a community mediator whose handbook bore the subtle lamp watermark that marked heritage protocol materials. "We don't hurry the middle of discussions," Tessa emphasized, teaching apprentices to value process over quick conclusions. 15-year-old Lena, wearing a small lamp-shaped charm, reflected, "I used to think leadership meant talking the most. Now I understand it means noticing who hasn't spoken yet." The investigative pattern became clear as Elena documented these observations. Communities with heritage protocol influence had successfully transmitted intellectual freedom and ethical reasoning across generations, creating young citizens who approached problems with curiosity rather than dogma. These children demonstrated greater capacity for critical thinking, collaborative problem-solving, and adaptive responses to unexpected challenges. Elena examined student projects displayed throughout the education wing, collaborative research on Vault systems, interviews with community elders, and creative interpretations of their underground society's development. The work reflected educational approaches that encouraged questioning, analysis, and independent synthesis rather than memorization of predetermined conclusions. Even their informal communications carried heritage protocol influence, with youth radio broadcasts often ending with the phrase, "keep a light for later," a gentle recognition of intellectual continuity across time and distance. Through systematic comparison of educational outcomes, Elena discovered that heritage protocol communities raised children who were more comfortable with ambiguity, more skilled at collaborative decision-making, and better equipped to navigate complex ethical questions. These young people understood their community's origins not as founding myths requiring reverence, but as complex historical realities demanding ongoing interpretation and learning. As afternoon light settled through the education wing's artificial windows, Elena recognized that her investigation had uncovered the Heritage Protocol's greatest achievement. The network's preservation efforts had created cultural foundations that enabled continued democratic development and adaptive problem-solving within their underground sanctuary. The children's voices, their questions, their comfort with complexity, represented living testimony to how individual acts of conscience had rippled through generations to shape entire civilizations. Elena prepared to document this crucial phase of her investigation, understanding that these young citizens would inherit not just survival protocols, but tools for shaping their own destinies with wisdom and compassion. Tomorrow would bring exploration of how Heritage Protocol influence had spread beyond individual communities, through inter-vault communication networks, revealing the broader impact of preservation efforts on post-war civilization throughout the wasteland. The lamp still burned, both on her desk and in the bright minds of children who would carry its light into whatever future awaited their underground world. The evening light in Vault 81's communication center carried Elena toward the culminating phase of her Heritage Protocol investigation, where individual discoveries would weave together into understanding of how preservation efforts had evolved beyond their original Vault-Tec boundaries. Her documentation of educational practices and generational impact had revealed systematic cultivation of intellectual freedom within their community, but the broader implications required examining how these cultural foundations had shaped inter-vault cooperation and the emerging civilization that characterized post-war reconstruction throughout the wasteland. Communications specialist Ben Carter prepared the long-range transmission equipment with his characteristic attention to technical precision, the familiar blend of electronic efficiency and distant voices, creating technological foundations that enabled scattered communities to maintain cultural continuity despite vast distances and hostile environmental conditions. The room carried its usual atmosphere of warmed plastic and ozone, while the soft hum of data transmission created the meditative backdrop Elena had come to associate with careful research. "You can tell when operators were trained by the same hands," Ben observed, as Elena settled into her documentation routine. "They open channels the same way, using that chime pattern." He demonstrated with gentle taps on the console, short, long, a sequence that Elena had heard countless times without recognizing its significance. "It's become habit on our network. A way of saying this message carries care for whoever receives it." Elena felt the familiar quickening of discovery as she began systematically reviewing archived transmission logs, searching for patterns that had operated beneath her awareness for years. The chime sequence appeared throughout their communication records, marking messages that contained more than practical coordination. When transmissions carried context, careful framing, or questions paired with data rather than predetermined conclusions. The pattern had evolved into a recognition sign for communications enhanced with Heritage Protocol methodologies. Her analysis revealed that the lamp symbol had undergone sophisticated digital evolution, appearing as subtle watermarks in file metadata, fleeting visual elements in video messages, and coded phrases woven into conversations that superficially discussed resource allocation or weather patterns. These were not direct calls to action, but quiet acknowledgments between individuals who understood the deeper purpose of their exchanges, creating networks of understanding that operated parallel to official administrative communications. Elena contacted Dr. Sarah Kim at Vault 111, whose archives had revealed parallel Heritage Protocol operations, to discuss how their community's similar educational foundations had enabled productive collaboration despite different experimental parameters. "Our communities share approaches to governance and problem-solving that make cooperation natural rather than forced," Kim explained through the secure channel. We both emphasize transparent decision-making and collective responsibility, which creates trust foundations necessary for regional partnerships. The conversation revealed systematic differences in how communities approached external relationships based on their internal cultural development. Heritage protocol communities consistently demonstrated greater willingness to share resources and collaborate on complex regional challenges, treating other settlements as potential partners rather than competitors for limited resources. This contrasted sharply with communities that maintained rigid corporate programming, which often developed isolationist policies and hierarchical approaches to external cooperation. Elena discovered evidence of the Central Commonwealth Water Sharing Agreement, a sophisticated resource management protocol that emphasized sustainability and equitable distribution rather than competitive advantage. The document bore subtle LAMP watermarks and demonstrated heritage protocol influence through its emphasis on collaborative problem-solving and adaptive governance structures. Similar patterns appeared in the Eastern Vault Education Consortium, which had created standardized curricula that preserved intellectual diversity while ensuring compatibility between different communities' educational approaches. Through systematic analysis of inter-vault resource-sharing patterns, Elena traced how heritage protocol methodologies had spread throughout the Vault network via trade relationships, personnel exchanges, and collaborative projects. Communities that maintained rigid corporate programming often adopted more flexible approaches after extended contact with the heritage protocol communities, demonstrating how intellectual freedom could be transmitted through patient example rather than direct confrontation. Elena found documentation of joint educational initiatives where children participated in inter-vault learning exchanges that emphasized comparative cultural analysis and collaborative problem-solving. These programs had created generational connections that continued strengthening regional cooperation as participants assumed leadership roles within their respective communities. The lamp symbol appeared in organizational materials as evolved design elements that marked resources enhanced with discussion frameworks and critical thinking exercises. The investigation revealed specific examples of heritage protocol influence on regional problem-solving. When Vault 76 faced food shortages due to unforeseen environmental shifts, Vault 111 offered immediate assistance, sharing not just resources, but knowledge of cultivating resilient crops. This mutual aid operated on underlying understanding that collective survival depended on shared knowledge and compassionate support, rather than trade obligations or competitive advantage. Elena examined transmission logs from the past decade, discovering coded communications between sympathetic individuals across multiple Vault communities. The messages used euphemistic language that satisfied administrative oversight, while coordinating preservation activities and mutual support for intellectual freedom initiatives. The network had evolved into what Ben described as a climate rather than a conspiracy. Temperature and humidity, shaped by many small systems, tended well. Through careful documentation, Elena understood that the Heritage Protocol's greatest achievement was not stopping Vault-Tec's experiments, but ensuring that alternative perspectives and critical thinking tools survived alongside them. The network had created cultural foundations that enabled communities to evolve beyond their original programming, developing governance structures and social practices that honored human dignity while addressing practical survival challenges. As Elena completed her analysis of communication patterns, she recognized that her investigation had revealed evidence of systematic cultural evolution that transcended individual community boundaries. The Heritage Protocol had operated as both preservation network and transformation catalyst, creating self-sustaining systems of mutual support and collaborative problem-solving that continued operating decades after the original materials had been distributed. The lamp still burned on her desk, its steady illumination echoing the countless connections that bound Vault communities together through shared commitment to democratic values and intellectual freedom. Elena's research had documented how individual acts of conscience had rippled through generations and across vast distances to influence entire regional civilizations, creating foundations for the diverse, resilient societies that characterized successful wasteland reconstruction. Tomorrow would bring exploration of how these preservation efforts had influenced the living heritage of contemporary vault communities, examining how inherited tools combined with present circumstances to create ongoing cultural adaptation. The network's true measure lay not in historical archives, but in current practices, in rooms where decisions were made with competence and care, where the heritage protocol had become a way of being rather than a secret to preserve. The morning after Elena's exploration of inter-vault communication networks found her moving through Vault 81's common areas with transformed perception, observing how decades of heritage protocol influence had woven itself into the living fabric of their community in ways that transcended historical preservation to become active cultural practice. Her investigation had revealed the systematic efforts to preserve intellectual freedom and democratic values, but now she sought to understand the ultimate measure of success. How these inherited tools had shaped contemporary life in ways that honored both heritage and ongoing adaptation to an ever-changing world. Elena began her observations in the community assembly hall, where residents gathered for their weekly governance meeting with the comfortable efficiency of long-established democratic practice. The circular seating arrangement, the collaborative facilitation methods, and the emphasis on consensus building all reflected heritage protocol methodologies transmitted through institutional memory rather than formal instruction. She documented how discussions proceeded through careful listening phases before moving to collaborative problem-solving, creating space for dissenting voices and ensuring decisions emerged through collective wisdom rather than hierarchical decree. The current debate focused on water allocation adjustments needed to support a new hydroponic expansion. But Elena recognized that the process itself demonstrated inherited tools for ethical reasoning and collaborative decision-making. Residents asked probing questions about long-term sustainability, considered impacts on neighboring communities, and sought creative solutions that would benefit collective welfare. The quality of their discourse, patient, thoughtful, inclusive, reflected educational foundations that had emphasized critical thinking over compliance, cultural adaptability over rigid programming. Elena moved to the educational wing, where she observed Mrs. Martinez conducting an afternoon discussion circle, with teenage students examining ethical scenarios through role-playing exercises. The students approached complex moral questions with sophisticated reasoning skills, comfortable with ambiguity and multiple perspectives in ways that demonstrated successful transmission of heritage protocol values across generations. Their ease with questioning authority, examining institutional practices, and collaborating on solutions revealed intellectual foundations that would enable continued adaptation to changing circumstances. In the hydroponics bay, Elena found Dr. Chen coordinating with agricultural specialists from 3 other Vault communities through the Inter-Vault Communication Network, sharing cultivation techniques and coordinating regional food security initiatives. The collaborative approach to resource management, the emphasis on mutual aid over competitive advantage, and the integration of diverse agricultural knowledge all reflected heritage protocol influence on how communities approached external relationships and collective problem-solving. Elena prepared to present her comprehensive findings to the community, understanding that her investigation had revealed something far more significant than historical curiosity. The Heritage Protocol represented systematic proof of humanity's capacity to preserve dignity and intellectual freedom within comprehensive control systems, creating foundations for democratic culture that continued shaping their underground society decades after the original preservation efforts. The evening presentation took place in the same assembly hall where Elena had observed democratic governance in practice, with residents arranging themselves in the collaborative seating patterns that had become natural through years of collective decision-making. Elena's documentation spread across display tables, photographs of lamp symbols, personnel records, educational materials, and communication logs that told the story of how individual acts of conscience had shaped their community's cultural DNA. The Heritage Protocol succeeded not by stopping Vault-Tec's experiments, Elena began, her voice carrying the measured authority of careful scholarship, but by ensuring that alternative perspectives and critical thinking tools would survive alongside corporate programming, creating foundations for communities to evolve beyond their original parameters through patient cultivation of intellectual freedom and collaborative problem-solving. Her presentation traced the network's development through its individual architects and revealed how their preservation efforts had manifested in contemporary Vault-81 practices. The community's collaborative governance structures, emphasis on transparent decision-making, and commitment to preserving diverse perspectives all reflected Heritage Protocol methodologies that had become institutional memory rather than conscious imitation of historical models. Cal Morrison spoke from his position in the discussion circle, his weathered hands gesturing toward the service tunnels below. Those chalk lamps weren't just emergency markers. They were promises that someone cared about guiding people safely through difficult passages. That same spirit shows up in how we approach problems today. We mark safe paths for each other through collaborative discussion and mutual support. Dr. Chen added her perspective on how the network's educational enhancements had shaped their community's approach to knowledge and learning. The Heritage Protocol created conditions where intellectual freedom and ethical reasoning could flourish naturally. We inherited tools for critical thinking and collaborative problem-solving that help us navigate contemporary challenges with wisdom and compassion. Elena's analysis demonstrated how Heritage Protocol communities had developed superior adaptive capacity compared to vaults that maintained rigid corporate programming. When faced with resource challenges, technological failures, or social conflicts, communities with intellectual freedom foundations consistently developed creative solutions through collective problem-solving, rather than authoritarian decision-making or competitive individualism. The discussion revealed ongoing effects of the Heritage Protocol's influence on contemporary community life. Young adults recognized how their educational experiences had prepared them for democratic participation and ethical reasoning. Parents described household discussions that emphasized collaborative decision-making and critical examination of community practices. Administrators explained how their governance structures had evolved to prioritize transparency and collective welfare over hierarchical efficiency. Elena recognized that the lamp symbols that had begun her investigation now appeared throughout their community in evolved forms: design elements in artwork, architectural details in common spaces, and subtle patterns that created visual continuity with the network's original preservation efforts. These weren't nostalgic references, but living expressions of values that continued guiding their underground society through ongoing adaptation and growth. As the formal presentation concluded and discussion continued through the evening, Elena understood that her investigation had revealed the Heritage Protocol's greatest achievement: creating self-sustaining systems of intellectual freedom and ethical reasoning that operated through institutional memory and professional practice, rather than conscious preservation of historical secrets. The network had become cultural DNA rather than historical artifact, shaping how communities approached problems and made decisions in ways that honored both heritage and hope. The lamp still burned on her desk and in the bright conversations that continued through the corridors, carrying forward the network's patient commitment to preserving human dignity through careful attention to both institutional structures and individual conscience. Tomorrow would bring exploration of how these preservation efforts had influenced the broader wasteland through trade relationships and cultural exchange. revealing the Heritage Protocol's impact on post-war civilization beyond individual Vault communities. The morning after Elena's presentation found her preparing for surface exploration with the same methodical precision she brought to all scholarly endeavors. But today, her investigation would carry her beyond the familiar boundaries of archive rooms into the vast landscape where Vault communities intersected with the broader tapestry of wasteland civilization. Her documentation of Heritage Protocol influence within their underground sanctuary had revealed systematic cultivation of intellectual freedom and democratic values. But the network's ultimate scope required understanding how these preservation efforts had rippled outward through the countless quiet interactions between Vault dwellers and surface settlement. Elena accompanied the monthly trade delegation led by Marcus Chen, whose diplomatic approach to external negotiations reflected the collaborative problem-solving methodologies she had been documenting throughout her Heritage Protocol research. The delegation's preparation emphasized sustainable relationships and mutual benefit rather than competitive advantage, treating surface communities as potential partners in regional development rather than sources for resource extraction. Their careful attention to ethical considerations and long-term consequences demonstrated how Vault-trained governance approaches had shaped their communities' external relationships. The journey beyond Vault 81's protective threshold revealed landscape that bore witness to both devastation and renewal, where human settlements had emerged from the ruins through patient attention to survival needs and community building. The wasteland's harsh beauty, twisted metal sculptures created by radiation storms, verdant patches where purification technology had restored soil fertility, settlements combining salvaged materials with innovative architecture demonstrated humanity's persistent capacity for adaptation despite overwhelming challenges. Elena's first significant discovery came at a modest trading post where wooden awnings cast striped shade across communal tables. The post keeper, a woman named Rena, wore a scarf stitched with repeating lamp medallions, so faded they appeared as simple geometric patterns. When Elena inquired about the design, Rena gestured toward a board of posted notices where a child's drawing showed figures speaking in turn, each holding small lamps. "We keep a listening hour at dusk," Rena explained with quiet pride. "People bring news, sometimes puzzles that need solving together." Under a shelf of weathered books secured by smooth stones, Elena discovered educational materials bearing subtle Heritage Protocol markers. The texts emphasized collaborative problem-solving and ethical reasoning through discussion frameworks that encouraged multiple perspectives rather than predetermined conclusions. Rena mentioned the books had arrived years earlier, with a caravaner who requested only that they remain accessible for community use. Residents borrowed, returned, and added marginal notes, creating a living archive that grew through collective engagement. Jacob Martinez, the experienced trader who had become Elena's guide, produced his route ledger wrapped in protective oilcloth. Along the margins of practical notations about water sources and safe passages, small lamp sketches appeared beside certain settlements. "Those places welcome conversations," Jacob explained, his weathered hands tracing the symbols. "They trade in questions as much as goods. Different kind of safety. They'll share knowledge before they'll share water sometimes." At a riverside settlement built around a restored ferry crossing, Elena observed governance structures that reflected Heritage Protocol influence through organic adaptation rather than conscious imitation. The community council maintained meeting records that preserved dissenting opinions alongside majority decisions, creating historical documentation that emphasized process over predetermined outcomes. A council scribe named Oren tapped his ledger with satisfaction, explaining they had learned the practice from neighbors under the hill, who understood that preserving complexity helped communities navigate difficult seasons with greater resilience. Elena documented how lamp symbols had evolved throughout the wasteland in her architectural details, trader marks, and community emblems that represented commitment to collaborative governance and ethical conduct. At a market ring near a rebuilt overpass, she discovered a seamstress whose pattern book-paired practical garment instructions with cooperation frameworks. The lamp appeared beside techniques for group mending projects, not because the work required multiple hands, the seamstress explained, but because stories traveled better when people worked together on shared tasks. The investigation revealed specific examples of heritage protocol influence on successful wasteland reconstruction. A water-sharing agreement between 3 settlements demonstrated sophisticated resource management that emphasized sustainability and equitable distribution rather than competitive advantage. The document bore subtle lamp watermarks and reflected collaborative problem-solving approaches that had spread through trade relationships and personnel exchanges, rather than formal instruction or conscious cultural transmission. Elena's conversations with surface dwellers revealed how former Vault residents had carried their community's cultural practices into the broader wasteland, creating continuities between underground preservation efforts and surface reconstruction initiatives. David Chen, who had emigrated from Vault 1115 5 years earlier, described how his approach to establishing trade relationships emphasized long-term mutual benefit over immediate profit maximization, reflecting governance values absorbed during his youth in a collaborative underground society. At a regional coordination meeting, Elena observed how heritage protocol methodologies had influenced inter-settlement cooperation networks. The emphasis on transparent communication, democratic participation, and collective decision-making reflected educational foundations that had adapted to address practical challenges of coordinating mutual aid across vast distances and diverse community structures. Former Vault dwellers served as cultural bridges, carrying democratic values into surface settlements while adapting these approaches to wasteland survival realities. The patterns Elena documented revealed that communities with heritage protocol influence consistently demonstrated superior adaptive capacity when facing regional challenges. These settlements developed creative solutions through collaborative problem-solving, maintained stable relationships with neighboring communities, and successfully integrated diverse populations through inclusive decision-making processes that honored both individual dignity and collective welfare. As evening approached and Elena prepared to return to Vault 81, she understood that her investigation had revealed the heritage protocol's influence extending far beyond individual community boundaries to shape the broader trajectory of post-war civilization. The network's preservation efforts had created cultural foundations that continued influencing how human societies approached rebuilding from devastation while maintaining dignity and hope. The lamp still burned throughout the wasteland in countless evolved forms, carved into ferry posts, stitched into trader scarves, painted on community meeting houses, carried forward through individual choices and institutional practices that honored both heritage and adaptation. Elena's documentation would preserve understanding of how preservation networks had influenced the ongoing story of human resilience and cultural evolution, ensuring future generations would recognize connections between individual conscience and collective flourishing. Tomorrow would bring the final phase of her investigation, returning to the quiet archive where her research had begun, integrating all discoveries into comprehensive documentation that would preserve the Heritage Protocol's complete story for communities continuing to adapt its methodologies to whatever challenges awaited their journey through an uncertain but hopeful future. The evening settled around Elena with the familiar embrace of Vault 81's engineered comfort, the artificial skylights dimming to their nocturnal cycle as she returned from the wasteland to the quiet sanctuary of Archive Room C. Her investigation had carried her from mysterious lamp symbols in document margins to comprehensive understanding of how individual acts of conscience had shaped entire civilizations. Now, in the warm circle of her desk lamp's glow, she would complete the work of preservation that would ensure this story survived for future generations. Elena arranged her findings across the workspace with the ritual precision that had anchored her scholarly practice for years. Photographs of lamp symbols, from faded chalk marks in service tunnels to subtle watermarks in digital files, lay alongside personnel records revealing the network's human architects. Communication logs depicted quiet webs of inter-vault cooperation, while field notes from surface settlements showed how heritage protocol values had spread throughout the wasteland. Each fragment, once mysterious, now resonated with collective meaning that illuminated humanity's persistent capacity to preserve dignity within comprehensive systems of control. The pre-war snow globe sat at the edge of her lamp's illumination, its miniature house with the single glowing window serving as tangible reminder of the investigation's central discovery. What had begun as simple curiosity about marginal notations had revealed Vault-Tec's most significant legacy. Not their dramatic experiments or technological innovations, but the unintended lesson about the impossibility of completely controlling human culture and creativity. Elena began composing her final analysis, understanding that her research had uncovered something more profound than historical curiosity. The Heritage Protocol succeeded not by preventing corporate experimentation, but by ensuring alternative perspectives would survive alongside official programming. Network members like Dr. Hawthorne, Cal Morrison, and Maria Santos had worked within institutional constraints to preserve intellectual diversity, creating foundations for communities to evolve beyond their original parameters through patient cultivation rather than revolutionary disruption. Cal arrived to assist with the final documentation, his weathered hands moving carefully among the archival materials. "Funny thing," he observed, examining a photograph of chalk lamp symbols. "When I was young, I thought those marks were there just for me." Turns out they were there for whoever came next. His words captured the network's essential character: custodial rather than oppositional, focused on preservation rather than destruction, ensuring continuity across generations through small, consistent acts of conscience. Elena's analysis revealed that Heritage Protocol influence had manifested throughout contemporary Vault civilization in ways that transcended conscious historical preservation. Collaborative governance structures, educational approaches emphasizing critical thinking over compliance, and intercommunity cooperation networks all reflected methodologies that had become cultural DNA rather than formal policy. The lamp symbols had evolved from coded markings into living expressions of values that continued guiding their underground society through ongoing adaptation to changing circumstances. The investigation demonstrated that communities with Heritage Protocol connections had consistently developed superior adaptive capacity when facing post-war challenges. These societies created innovative solutions through collective problem-solving, maintained stable relationships through transparent communication, and successfully integrated diverse populations through inclusive decision-making processes that honored both individual dignity and collective welfare. As Elena organized her findings for preservation and distribution throughout the Vault network, she understood that the true twist in Vault-Tec's legacy lay not in dramatic revelation, but in quiet reframing. The corporation's experiments had been comprehensive, but they had encountered the persistent weather of human character. The Heritage Protocol had not opposed these systems, but had behaved like careful maintenance. Routine, attentive, satisfied with small repairs that ensured essential functions continued operating even when primary systems failed. Elena prepared her documentation with meticulous attention to accessibility and preservation. Her research would join the ongoing archive of how communities learn from their past while adapting to future challenges. The Heritage Protocol represented systematic proof that individual conscience could shape collective destiny through patient attention to both immediate needs and long-term cultural development, creating self-sustaining systems of intellectual freedom that operated through institutional memory rather than conscious historical preservation. The comprehensive story Elena had uncovered revealed connections between individual communities that transcended administrative boundaries, creating networks of understanding that operated through shared commitment to democratic values rather than formal organizational structures. Her documentation would help preserve understanding of how preservation networks had influenced the ongoing story of human resilience and cultural evolution, ensuring future generations would recognize connections between individual conscience and collective flourishing. As evening deepened around the archive, Elena completed her final preparations with quiet satisfaction. She arranged the materials for duplication and distribution, ensuring her research would reach archivists and historians throughout the wasteland who continued building upon foundations established by the Heritage Protocol Network. Her investigation had revealed that Vault-Tec's legacy was neither purely villainous nor entirely misguided, but profoundly human in its mixture of good intentions, ethical blindness, and unintended consequences that created opportunities for individual conscience to operate within institutional constraints. Elena placed her completed research in the secure archive system, adding another layer to their community's ongoing effort to understand origins while shaping future development. The Heritage Protocol had created foundations for intellectual freedom that would continue guiding Vault civilization through patient cultivation of democratic values and collaborative problem-solving approaches that honored both heritage and hope. Before extinguishing her lamp, Elena turned the snow globe one final time, watching glitter settle around the miniature house. The tiny window shimmered briefly, then steadied into quiet illumination that reflected countless other lights throughout the Vault network, each one a beacon of preserved knowledge and cultural continuity. The lamp still burned, yet not brighter than necessary, not louder than required, simply present wherever people maintained faith with each other and documented what they learned for those who would follow. Elena pulled the chain, and the circle of light withdrew into its housing, leaving the archive in the Vault's gentle hush. Outside, corridors carried late footsteps softly toward rest. Inside, the sealed documentation held what it needed to hold, evidence that individual acts of ethical courage could ripple through generations, creating foundations for freedom and dignity that survived even the most comprehensive attempts at social engineering. The work continued, patient and methodical, ensuring that future generations would inherit not just survival, but the full richness of human experience and tools to shape their own destinies with wisdom and compassion.